Hello again, my name's Wade, aka the past caring coach, an uncompetitive masters powerlifter who's represented England, an IPF level 2 powerlifting coach, a level 3 PT and an IPF referee. In the search for marginal gains as a lifter, an obvious area where anyone can improve is by finding the best form and by understanding what it feels like in order to be able to consistently repeat it. So what are form and feel for lifters? A quick Google search will tell you that there's no agreed academic definition of either. So for want of a better understanding, here are my definitions, and if anyone's got something better, please let me know in the comments. I'm going to define form as the movement patterns used during an attempt to complete a repetition. Feel I'll define as the sum total of all of the sensations surrounding that attempt. Now you'll notice that I use the term attempt here because there's the possibility that your lift may fail, either due to a technical error or simply a lack of strength. I want to discuss feel in more detail later, but I want to start by looking at form. Picking a weight up and putting it down is your form. That bit's well understood, but the sensations surrounding that lift are less so. They will, however, become vitally important when I tell you that there's no such thing as perfect form. Once we understand that, how a lift feels becomes of very, very prime importance. The trolls and the gym bros will tell you that there is perfect form, theirs, and they will gleefully tell you what you should do. They'll tell you that a squat, a bench and a deadlift should be performed in a specific fashion and should look a particular way. Despite this, there's no specific requirement for a competition lift to look aesthetically pleasing. Indeed, it can be as ugly and grindy as hell, providing that it's within the rules. And as for training lifts, these just need to move the weight safely. Now post a video of your squat on Instagram and wait for the comments. Invited or not, you'll get 1,000,001 responses telling you that you're doing it wrong, or at least doing certain aspects of it wrong, whether you're a novice or a world record holder, and heaven forbid you submit a video of a bench press with a big arch or a sumo deadlift. Try this. You won't just get advice, you'll get varying shades of purple abuse. There's a video on YouTube featuring Nathaniel Messiah and Eddie Hall, where two men who have both held world deadlift records argue over the correct deadlift form. If they're arguing, what hope is there for the rest of us, especially where virtually every influencer and coach has an opinion on what their idea of perfect form looks like? Once the trolls have calmed down, hopefully they will listen to the voice of reason here. There simply isn't perfect form. It doesn't exist and it can't. Here's why. Individual differences. If you are 7 feet tall and weigh over 300 pounds, you are not going to have the same movement patterns as a 4-foot lifter weighing 100 pounds. Limb and torso lengths are going to be different, and individual muscular and strength imbalances are going to be seen, which will determine how you move and how you lift. Even Chris Bumstead, who the fitness world would seem to agree is as close to the perfect specimen as you can get, has biceps that are slightly lacking. And Arnold's quads weren't particularly big by today's standards. So the perfect build doesn't exist, and even Arnold had stubborn calves that wouldn't grow. So we are all going to need to move and train differently, especially those of us that are further away from what the internet has defined as the ideal build. Lifters like Amanda Lawrence and Alba Bostrom both have knee cave or valgus in their squats, but both shift elite loads, and this is a common sight amongst Olympic lifters, and for every low bar perpendicular shin squatter there is a knees over toes high bar lifter. Those that can arch in the bench press do, and those that can't troll them. So even elite form isn't perfect and can't be unless we define what perfect form looks like, and we clearly can't. My squat is a high bar, lopsided mess where the hands are too close into the neck and I have one shoulder bigger than the other. So who am I to comment on what perfect form looks like? Well, actually this is good form for me because it's the only way I can get under the bar to squat thanks to a bone spur and limited shoulder mobility. I didn't squat like this in my formative years, and the point is that injuries and injury history can dictate what good form looks like for an individual at any given time. A beginner might not be able to squat to depth because they have poor ankle mobility. And whether you choose to squat in flats or heels, close stance or wide stance with thumb over or around the bar, or deadlift conventionally or sumo is often a matter of personal preference. And there are pros and cons to all of these different approaches. I'm probably built to sumo deadlift, but I simply can't get on with the lift. And my sumo is about 10 kilos lighter than my conventional best deadlift. So form is often dictated by confidence and simple requirements of comfort. Grip width on a bench press and the amount of elbow flaring is a regular point of contention for online trolls. But your strongest position really is an individual matter. If you're trying to build a huge chest, a guillotine press, lowering the bar down to the neck and pressing it with an extreme elbow flared wide grip is going to get the most pec involvement and development. It will maximise the stretch on the pec. It will also send a lot of people's shoulders on a journey to the nearest orthopaedic surgeon very, very quickly. So some will advise us to tuck the elbows to counter this. That makes benching a completely tricep dominant exercise. In reality, the ideal probably lies somewhere in between, recruiting an equal amount of pec and tricep and then adjusting elbows and grip width accordingly, wider or narrower, to the point where we are strongest and can produce the most force, but not so wide as to endanger our shoulders. Squat stance width is also highly individual, and again it's dependent upon which position we're strongest in, or feel the strongest and most balanced in, and are able to produce the most force without falling over. Women have different hips to men. They're designed for ease of childbirth. This affects ideal squat stance width, and a large number of men and women have an inability to squat with a narrow stance simply because their hip anatomy won't allow it. A hip scouter test is performed by having a person lie on their back and a trainer or physio or doctor pushes one of their knees up towards their chin. The acetabulum, the hip socket in certain people, will only allow a partial raising of the knee up to the chin before the pelvic bone restricts the range of motion. Push the knee wider and the person can typically get the knee higher. Translated to a squat, this means that people with this sort of issue have to squat with a wider stance to hip depth, whether they like it or not. So our form is always going to be a victim of our anatomy. A retroverted acetabulum is where the hip sockets are shaped in such a way that the thigh bone, the femur, can only move so far in the socket because of the shape of the socket. If you squat with a wider stance, the range of motion is less limited by the bony structure and you can get deeper. This is not an uncommon condition, and as the back guru Stuart McGill points out, if you have this, your chances of being an elite Olympic weightlifter are severely limited because the sport requires a fairly narrow squat stance. Indeed, the ability to squat deep and narrow is common in certain ethnic groups. Have you ever wondered why Bulgarians, Russians and Chinese seem to make the best Olympic lifters? It's simply the way they're born and the way they're built. Now the point here is that if you are built a particular way or have injuries and so forth, these are going to dictate your movement patterns and determine the ones which are ideal for you. So a textbook squat, bench or deadlift is only going to be seen in a textbook, and very few people are going to look like that textbook lifter. Even fewer are going to move like that textbook lifter. Okay, so perfect form does not exist. But what are the elements that make up good form that we can find? The first and essential requirements are safety and longevity. If the lift isn't safe, your chances of longevity are limited, and without longevity you aren't going to make any substantial gains. Building muscle and strength isn't an overnight process, even if you have an interest in chemistry. The way we make gains is via progressive overload, adding weight, adding reps and adding sets over time. If you're constantly injured and can't train, there will be no overload. Rather than progressing, you'll lose all your gains and regress after a while. So the key directive in relation to good form is that it allows you to stay safe, stay healthy and lift long. Now what is a safe lift is open to debate, and we can cover that when we look at the individual lifts, but the internet is full of experts telling you that it's safe to deadlift, it's not safe to deadlift, it's safe and not safe to round the spine in a deadlift, arching in the bench press is either fine or it's putting you in a wheelchair, and full depth squatting is or isn't necessary depending upon who's giving the opinion. Online there are a series of myths and truths, but my view is that once we stop seeking perfect form, there are certain things that are obviously unsafe. Putting too much weight on the bar with no control and throwing it around, for example. But the body is fairly robust, and a bit of butt wink or valgus on a squat or back rounding in a deadlift is not the end of the world. It might not be producing the most force or keeping you perfectly safe, but if you've given some thought to the lift and what it's intended to do, you can still get results and come out alive. In the case of Alba Vostrom and Amanda Lawrence, you can still win titles and break records with form that the internet hates. Along with safety, there are a number of other elements that are required for a good lift. Economy of movement is the first of these. Let's say that you're one of those lifters that likes to take a 12-step walk out on a squat. That's a common thing I see, and it is not good. Comfort is an issue, and I remember talking to a lifter at a competition who did this. He said it was because he was always hitting the rack with a squat. My point to him was that when Jesus Oliveira broke the world squat record at the first Sheffield competition, the walkout was a 3-step affair. As the plates were oscillating and the bar was flexing under the massive load, this was harder than the squat, which was easy once he'd settled. If you take loads of steps, the more there is to go wrong. And if you're hitting the rack on the way up or down, that's because your bar path isn't the shortest line up and down in a nice perpendicular straight line. It's veering off into the rack. So keeping things as simple as you can is an obvious requirement for achieving good form. Let's consider a deadlift. For easy mathematics, let's say that the distance from the floor to lockout for a random lifter is 1 metre. If you pull the bar straight up the shins, that's a pull of about 1 metre. Let's suppose that the bar starts to get away from the shins in a big arc to lockout. Again, for easy mathematics, let's suppose that the bar travels in a perfect semicircle from floor to lockout. Pi times diameter gives us the circumference of a circle. So 1 metre times 3.14 pi gives us the circumference. Half that and we're moving the bar 1.57 metres. That is 57 centimetres more than we need to. So not only are we increasing the chances of missing the lift, we're also lifting it further than we need to and wasting energy. So the second requirement of a good lift is that it needs to be efficient in terms of the energy we use. An additional issue where the bar gets away from the shin is that this makes the lift harder because the load is away from our body's centre line. Hold a dumbbell at your side or directly overhead and you can hold it all day. Hold it out in front of you or at your side and you are in a mechanically disadvantageous position and you won't hold it for very long. This is because at arm's length, when you extend your arm, the distance between the object and your shoulder joint increases significantly. To generate the necessary increase in force or torque to counteract gravity, your muscles must exert a much greater force. So when the deadlift gets away from perpendicular straight lines, you aren't efficiently using your levers and it will be harder. When it's held overhead, the weight is nearer to your centre of mass, directly over the support, your body and shoulders. This minimises the rotational pull or torque and it distributes the load more efficiently. So a good lift needs to be economical, the least possible movement, and it needs to be efficient, moving the load with the least energy wasted. Now a good lift is also effective. If your lift looks picture perfect and appears to come straight out of a Soviet squat manual, if you can't move any weight with it, that's a clue that the technique isn't actually as good as you think it is, or that you need to get stronger. A final requirement of a good lift is repeatability or consistency. Every lift needs to look the same to build an automated set of movements. The last thing we want is to walk into a competition platform thinking, I hope I get it right this time. A consistent set of movement patterns with the least effort, the most mechanical efficiency, that's going to ensure a repeatable outcome. This might seem obvious, but it requires you to have trust in your movement patterns, and some lifters, typically newer ones, don't always have that. How can I tell? Their bar speed changes. It gets faster as the weight gets heavier. Now, there are people who lift very quickly and the bar speed is a very personal thing. However, Panic and instinct are interesting things, and if the mind thinks, oh my god, this is heavy, there is a tendency to react by speeding up and dive bombing a lift, bouncing into it and out of it, or dropping rather than lowering a bench press, for example, under control. So if you watch a competition at divisional or novice level, you'll see some newer lifters slowly control their openers, the second will be the same pace, but the heaviest third might suddenly speed up markedly. These lifters simply don't trust their technique. As a young man, I studied martial arts. An untrained Friday night fighter, the one outside the bar after 10 pints of lager looking for trouble, will typically swing a huge haymaker from miles behind them. The arm will be rigid and stiff as possible. They think that that will generate the most force. Now, anybody with a bit of fighting skill will see that coming from a mile and get out of the way. Stiff and rigid is slow, loose and relaxed is fast. A trained fighter will pick a straighter punch and the arm will be relaxed right up until the point that it goes into and through the point of impact. When squatting, you need to be rigid throughout the squat, breathing in and bracing the muscles hard. This stiffness creates stability and means that the squat typically moves like that drunk guy's punch, slowly. If you suddenly speed up your squat, it means that you're losing that tightness, because it's hard to move quickly when you're tense. Take tightness and bracing away from a squat, and the middle of your body starts to become a squidgy marshmallow between the weight on your shoulders bearing down and your feet pushing up. The restaurant on the top of the Eiffel Tower stays up there because the steel under it is rigid. If the tower was made of jelly, it would collapse under the weight bearing down upon it. If we lose tension in a squat, we can bounce up and lose control out of the hole. Or we can lose tension in a bench press off the chest and miss the lift. But I hear you say Olympic lifters squat like this and do it to use the stretch reflex out of the hole. Indeed they do, but there is a roughly 5 to 4 to 3 to 1.5 ratio between the big four lifts. If you can deadlift 500 pounds, you can typically squat 400 pounds, bench 300 pounds and deadlift 100 to 150 pounds. This isn't carved in stone, but it isn't far off as a general ratio. As an Olympic lifter, you're only going to be squatting around a quarter of your biggest squat in an overhead lift, because you still have to hoist the load overhead after you've squatted it. If you misgroove the squat, the fact that you aren't squatting a maximal load makes it easier to recover. If you add an Olympic barbell, which isn't stiff, like a powerlifting bar, the whip of the flexing bar makes it easier to get to the catch position through sticking points and uses momentum for the final press. So you'll typically see powerlifters squat slower. This is unless they're Olympic weightlifters who have entered a powerlifting competition and brought their Olympic squats with them. This occasionally happens and I can spot those lifters a mile away. So why does this speeding up of the lift often occur, and what's the solution? Now, a heavy lift is scary and we don't want to be under that load for any longer than we need to be. Speeding up is an instinctive reaction to quickly get the hell out from under there. This is like a boxer getting floored. The instruction from a coach should be to stay down and take the full count. After the count, the sensible thing to do is to run, move, grab, lean, smother and spoil, simply to survive until the end of the round and get your head clear. Now, we often see fighters who are knocked down immediately jump up, pretending not to be hurt, which sends the right message, but they then start to swing and flail and they get easily picked off. This is instinct overruling training. This is what's happening when we start to disregard our training and rush a squat or bench press and lose tightness. So what's happening and why, and how do we overcome it? Now, in a street fight, there's no referee to give you a standing count and no one stepping in to break up a clinch. So you better be off the floor as soon as possible and flailing away in the hope that you don't get stomped on. It's a desperate response, but if you connect, you might just get lucky. This is instinctive survival. Boxing isn't street fighting, and boxers need to use their training to override the instinct and rely on the training. Now, the same thing applies to lifting. How do we do that? By repetition of movements in training, over and over and over again until they're embedded. The same movements repeated over and over create habits, and repeated habits become your default settings. So when things get heavy, we don't panic, and instead we fall into the training movements that work. Now, on 9/11, there are videos of thousands of people running away from the Twin Towers. There were, however, emergency service workers and troops running towards the danger. We call that brave, and they'll tell you it's just following our training. It's a conditioned and automated response built through hours and hours of training. Now, squatting a barbell is by no means the same as running towards such danger, but the training repetitions create the default behaviours and work on the same principle. You've heard the term train hard, compete easy. Well, my mantra is train hard, compete automatically. So we know that if our lifting technique is safe, economical, efficient, effective and repeatable, it should do the job. But if there's no such thing as perfect form, and that good form looks different for each individual, how the hell do we know if our form is genuinely good? This is where feel comes in, because how a lift feels tells us a lot about its form qualities. If the lift looks something like a good lift, as executed by top lifters, and it feels like a good lift, there's a strong possibility that it is good. If something doesn't feel right and looks obviously bad, then it definitely isn't good. That isn't the lift we want to be repeating, so we can almost find good by a process of trial and error, simply eliminating the things that don't work or don't feel right. Indeed, that's a big part of coaching. If you have a coach, how often have you heard them say, I want you to try this. If it works, great. If it doesn't, then it's time to try something else. I'm going to look at feel in the next video, but once again, thanks for watching, and I hope this has been interesting. As always, drop me a comment, and for coaching enquiries, you can contact me at the email address appearing on the screen now. See you soon.